Welcome back to the Saints Insider Podcast. Today is Thursday, February 13th, and it is Kellen Moore Day in New Orleans. Happy Kellen Moore Day to all who celebrate. We are here at our studio on Airline Drive about an hour after Kellen Moore wrapped up his introductory press conference as the new head coach of the New Orleans Saints. We spoke to Kellen Moore. Mickey Loomis and Gail Benson offered their brief statements as to why they chose Kellen Moore to lead the Saints in their new direction. And fellas, we're going to talk a little bit about the new head coach of the New Orleans Saints. We're going to spend the next 25 minutes or so doing it, get a quick reaction pod here. So I just kind of want to start off, guys, your just initial reaction. Kellen Moore spoke for about 37 minutes today. Didn't really say a whole lot, but there was some stuff that we can glean from it. So, Rod, let's start with you. What was your kind of initial reaction?
My initial reaction, I just kind of felt like I've seen some press conferences before, these new coaches, and a lot of times they come in and they make the big splash and they have everybody in the city fired up. And to me, this one didn't quite come across like that. I thought he was, I don't want to say, I guess evasive may be right. I didn't really feel like he gave a lot of insight onto what he wanted to do, but he did give us some. So for me, I don't think he just hit the home run, but I think he, just kind of got through the press conference.
Yeah, and I don't think it's not a bad thing. Like, Kellen Moore's not here to win press conferences.
Right.
I don't think we're going to get any Darren Rizzi moments out of him talking about clogging up a toilet. I don't think we're going to get any Dan Campbell biting kneecaps, but probably also not some of the more embarrassing moments we've seen out of head coaches in recent memory. I think it was kind of rapid fire. We were talking earlier, 65 questions in 37 minutes plus an opening statement. Didn't offer a ton of insight, but he did give us some things. So, Jeff, what was kind of your takeaway here?
Well, I think what Rod said, this wasn't a fire and brimstone, Newt Rockney type of moment. That's not who he is. I think he was authentic to who he's going to be as a head coach, and people just better get used to it. This is going to be probably the Kellen Moore we have as a head coach, but that's fine. He needs to be himself most of all, and I agree with you 100%, Luke. He's not out to win press conferences. He's going to show his strengths behind the scenes, putting together game plans and trying to lead this organization. And I think that's fine. This was not a day, pretty clearly early on, you could tell this was not a day we're going to find out a lot about the direction he's going to go, personnel, all the things people want to know. It wasn't going to come out today. We're going to find out in the days ahead.
Yeah, a lot of stuff close to the vest. Matt, what was your kind of takeaway?
Yeah, I think his actions will kind of say what his vision is for the team, but I think we still got a little bit of an idea. I'll be a little bit more positive. We're not being negative, but I'll be a little bit more sunshine and rainbows about it. I do think he kind of laid out a vision of how he wanted to play. The tempo answer was really interesting. It's setting a fast, a smart football team, physical. Like, you hear these cliches, but it seemed like it is kind of important to how teams need to play, and he seemed to grasp that. It's just the direction he wants the Saints to take was interesting. I don't necessarily know if he sees this as a rebuild situation. We can get into that, how he feels about Derek Carr. He left a lot of stuff kind of unanswered, even though we pressed him on it.
Yeah, and in fairness to Kellen Moore, he has been the head coach for about 24 hours. So he's not going to have a lot of answers, and he's not going to give them away either.
Right. He did have a 9-hour interview where, Derek Carr has come up of, hey, how do you feel about Derek Carr? And he gave probably a much more truthful answer of whether he can feel like he can win with them to Mickey Loomis. It's just, you're not going to come out the gates blazing like that.
Right. Yeah, there's surely a plan in place, and we're going to find it out over the next month or so. I think NFL free agency opens, March 15th?
Mm-hmm.
Today is February 13th, so about a month until we get some kind of definitive answers. So the biggest question is what is going to happen with Derek Carr? And he was pressed on that directly today. The question asked to him, is Derek Carr going to be your quarterback in week 1 of the 2025 season? And I'm not going to read the full quote because it's long. But basically, he said, hey, Derek's really, really talented. He's a starting quarterback in this league. He's a premier player in this league. I look forward to working with him through this process, which was not an answer to the question. It was dancing around the fact, and he did that a number of times throughout the press conference, where is Derek your guy? I think Derek's a good player. and that's about all we got out of him. So one way or another, the Saints are going to be accounting for a $51 million cap hit with Derek Carr this year. Even if he's a June 1st cut, they're going to be carrying that until June 2nd. So that's not going to be available to him, and any sort of relief, whether he's on the team or they move on from him. So it's really about whether they view him as part of the immediate future of the team. Guys, when you hear the way Kellen Moore answered questions about him today, what was kind of your gut feel on this? And we'll start with you, Jeff.
Well, I think if he wanted to have committed to him, he could have, and he didn't.
Right.
So I think
if he was
Trevor Lawrence and Jackson.
right,
Yeah.
he's absolutely going to be the guy. Right.
He had the chance to do that. He clearly is not ready to do that. Now, that doesn't mean he's not going to commit to him, but I'm kind of with Matt in that I would say that was the glass half empty if I'm Derek Carr, the way it was handled. But having said that, I think it's so early in the process. The fact that he was the offensive coordinator for the Super Bowl champion, that thing just got over a few days ago, complicates a lot of this because these are big decisions, maybe the biggest decision that he has to make. And I think expecting him to step in there today and answer that, I think is way too soon. Now, clearly he's had those conversations with Mickey Loomis in the building, and they know kind of what direction they're going, but it wasn't going to come out today. So I would say the fact that he didn't commit, though, it's certainly his future is up in the air. I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, I felt a little bit less encouraged that Derek Carr was going to stick around, but I do think it's too early to say. I mean, Kellen Moore did say that he looks forward to teaming up with Derek Carr, but I wouldn't read too much into it. And in fact, the answer I thought was maybe more interesting of if I did want to make an argument for Derek Carr sticking around is he said, hey, we can compete in this division. We can win. The Saints are so injured last year with them, but we saw in week 3 with the Eagles how like they pushed us to the final minute. That makes me think he feels a little bit better of the roster and maybe Derek Carr, but I don't know. The non-committal I think is probably the better tell.
We'll get into the competitive aspect of that in a minute. No, you're all good, but Rod, are you kind of feeling the same way these guys are?
Yeah, I mean, I thought he left it open, and if for some reason they decide to stick with Carr, I mean, he can. We can't ever go back on his press conference and say, "Oh, he lied." I mean, he left it open. So.
Right.
And I think that's what he wanted to do.
Yeah.
With that and a lot of other answers.
So we're going to go through the process.
Yeah.
Right. Which to me says it's no guarantee.
Right.
If he was going to be on the team, you'd say Derek's our guy.
Yep.
So I think that's all fair, and I do think that if he's looking at this as a potential, even a soft reset, it is going to be hard. I think when you're carrying that big salary for a player who's not on the team, or that big salary cap charge, it's going to be hard to find an answer at quarterback. I think that's factual.
Yeah, unless he's got something up his sleeve that we don't know about.
Right.
Like he's got some plan at that position. I mean, that to me would be the thing that would explain why he was evasive today.
Correct. All right. So the short answer of that is we don't really know what's going to happen with Derek Carr, but I think all of us have the sense that it is very much up in the air. That we'll move on to the next aspect of that, the one Matt was hinting at. No, I'm sorry. We'll start with the staff actually. Look, we know by now 2 members of his coaching staff, right? Brendan Nugent, who spent a number of years here as the assistant offensive line coach, and then the offensive line coach, and then spent some time with Kellen Moore in Los Angeles, and then Keith Williams is going to hold over. I think he's the last remaining member of that staff.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe with the exception of Clancy Barone, who hasn't been hired away yet. So he'll stick on to coach the wide receivers. That's 2 of the spots left. But I think probably the one that we're looking at is the most important on this staff is going to be the defensive coordinator. And I think he had some interesting things to say about that. But he said they're not going to make a rush on this hire. They're going to go through what he called a true process with finding the guy. And we know that there's interest in Brandon Staley, the former Los Angeles Chargers head coach, whom Moore worked under during his one season there. And then we also know today, after some reports came out, that there's interest in former LSU defensive coordinator Durante Jones, who was with the Minnesota Vikings this past offseason. Both of those guys are 3-4 coaches, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
Staley has a lot of ties with with Vic Fangio, coached under him with the Denver Broncos and I believe the Chicago Bears. So that's kind of a hint in what direction they're going to go in, but they are going to take their time with this. So, hey, what do you guys think about the staff?
Well, one thing,
together?
The thing that stood out to me was he said, like, they're going to interview a lot. I mean, it sounds like they're just starting there. So we're going to see multiple. Like, I think everyone was like, oh, they're just going to go to Brandon Staley. I didn't get that sense today at all. I think they're going to go through a very similar process of trying to interview a bunch of people before that. So that kind of surprised me a little bit.
Is there, Matt, if they do that, I mean, the combine's in 2 weeks. That's where you're identifying who's going to fit the team that you're putting together, right? It would seem that they would have to have somebody hired by then.
Yeah, I mean, Dennis Allen is a parallel for this. I wasn't here. You guys would be able to speak better than I would, but I mean, he was hired around roughly the same time and replacing Sean Payton. And did he have his staff set by the combine?
Yeah, but he retained most of
it.
the staff. So it was Chris Richard and Ryan Nielsen were his co-defensive coordinators. Pete Carmichael was his offensive coordinator. So they had an idea of what they wanted to do.
I think you're right. I mean, I think they got to try to get it done, right? But you want to have your guy in place for the combine.
I'll actually disagree with Jeff a little bit. I actually thought the answer why I thought Brandon Staley was maybe more of a lock than Jeff is suggesting is because, Luke, when you asked in the presser, hey, how important is previous head coaching experience on your staff? He said, certainly, like, that'll be represented. And so then I just assumed, all right, well, there you go. That's the Staley hire. So maybe I'm jumping to conclusions a little bit, but I think he's a pretty strong front runner, and it would make a lot of sense because Staley, as a coordinator, his Chargers defenses weren't very good, but I mean, his 1 year as a coordinator with the Rams, they were lights out.
Yeah, number one in scoring and total defense, and a lot of other metrics too. But I will say that to that point, there's a lot of different ways you can have head coach experience on your coaching staff. It doesn't have to be one of your coordinators. You could have somebody who's a long-time NFL head coach who's in like an advisory role. Like that's possible. We see it in the Saints front office right now. They've had numerous GMs cycle through in like consultant roles, and Randy Mueller's still with the team. So we've seen it that way. Rod, what's kind of your read on this after going through that?
Yeah, I guess the past couple of weeks I've been kind of saying, I think he probably has his guys picked out, and it's just going to be a matter of them kind of getting started. But after listening to him today, it sounds like he's truly going to go through a process, and maybe Staley is a front runner, but he sounded like he's pretty open to different things. He said he kind of implied that he doesn't care what you run the 4-3-3-4. He's going to look into everybody. I felt like so. I think he just kind of left it open, and he's going to go through a process.
It is interesting though, they as the last team to fill out a head coaching vacancy, they're also the last team to fill out their assistant coaching staffs. And we've seen teams are still kind of making hires, but the pool of candidates is kind of limited, right? And for those who are unaware of how this works, they can hire any number of assistants. Like they can't be blocked to hire any, like if they wanted to hire Doug Nussmeier to be their offensive coordinator, they can hire him because he's a quarterback's coach making the move to coordinator. Teams can't block that.
Promotions.
But if there's an assistant defensive line coach and they'd really like to be their D-line coach, teams can block that. Mm-hmm. The only things they can't block is a coordinator move. So they do have kind of a limited pool of guys they can go to for some of those position assistants. It'll be interesting to see how they fill those.
And there's a lot of speculation about Nussmeier coming here, and I think that's all going to be tied into what happens in Philly. Does he get a shot at the coordinator job there? And I'm sure you could tell the respect he has for Nick Sirianni. That's going to be a collaborative thing. He works with Sirianni on who he takes and who they give the blessing for him to take. But it sounded like that's going to play itself out here in the next week or so.
Would you guys have any preference on defensive coordinator? I mean, I do think that's the most important hire he's going to make. Right, that represents the other side of the ball for him.
I don't think it mattered. I think what he said is right. I mean, I think people get so caught up in the 3-4-4-3 thing. The way defenses work today, everything's so multiple. I mean, we see with the Eagles. I mean, they're in all kinds of different fronts under Vic Fangio. I think sometimes we get caught up in that. Now, I do think the personnel philosophy that the Saints have had for years fits into that. But I don't think the scheme necessarily is that big a deal to me.
I don't think the scheme, but I think Staley would be a solid hire just given his previous experience. I was going back and kind of reading what went wrong in the Staley era with his the Chargers defenses, and there were some anonymous quotes saying that he was too smart for his own good, that he really stuck to his game plan, and maybe that's lessened in a coordinator role versus being the head coach.
Yeah, he was really, really good as a coordinator, and rapid ascent from a linebackers coach to coordinator to head coach.
But I also think he fits very well with Kellen Moore, right? I mean, we're already seeing kind of what his points of emphasis were. Smart, he wants an intelligent, smart, almost analytical type of approach, and that's certainly
analytical. Definitely fits Brandon Staley.
Yeah, that's Staley to a T, right? So, look, I think that's important. Everybody need to be aligned. You don't have to all be carbon copies. I do think he's going to need some enforcers on his staff. I mean, I've been told that. He knows that, though. That's not him. So he's got to have a couple of Dan Campbell types on the staff, and I think he'll address that.
One quick point I do want to make is I'm with you on the scheme not being important, but you do need to know it.
Yep.
Because the Saints, for what Dennis Allen got here as a DC in 16?
Yeah, 15, 16.
15, 16. So they've been running essentially the same defense for almost 10 years. And they've drafted and built a roster around that kind of defense. They've avoided all these 230-pound college edge rushers for years. They're going to need those guys if they are in like a 3-4 type of scheme.
Yeah, of course.
So
they're going to need to know it soon.
They need to know it, especially before the combine.
And you need a guy in the middle that can clog it up a little bit better. You run the 3-4, and they don't really have that guy. I mean, I don't know, Colin Saunders.
I think Bobby Hebert made that pretty clear today as he walked out. He goes, we don't have that guy. We don't have that, big because when Bobby played, they ran the 3-4 with the dome patrol, and that was the key to the whole defense was the nose tackle.
You gotta have that guy in the middle, So that changes everything going to the combine.
Let's see. What's the kid from Michigan's name? Does he fit that mold? Mason Graham?
Right.
He's probably more of a God, I'm blanking on the positional term here.
Like three
Nose tackle?
Yeah, it's probably more of a 3 technique.
Yep.
Versus a nose. So I don't know. They're gonna have a lot of stuff to do with this roster, regardless of who takes over. Okay, something that Matt was alluding to earlier that I thought was interesting. I thought this was maybe the most interesting thing he said was whether or not the Saints are going to compete this year, be competitive, or kind of go into a rebuild. And this was like an evasive answer, as much of it was today. But I thought this was kind of telling. He said, we're going to compete for this division. We have a great opportunity in the NFC South. We're going to focus on that while we're building the team in the right way. Do you guys think that's a move they should take this year? Is to kind of continue going for it, or do you think do you read that and say we're going to compete while we're building the right way? We're going to build things up and hopefully we can compete. And if we don't, it's more about the building than it is competing this year.
I think any first year coach. I mean, I just think the whole term rebuild when you're this is your first head coach, and I think you want to win, you want to compete. So I think you just almost have to say that, regardless of what the front office philosophy is. I think you come in and you say you want to win and you want to compete for a division.
Yeah, it would be weird if he was coming in and being like, "Yeah, we're gonna win 3 games next year, but it's gonna be awesome in 2026."
Right.
I don't know. What do you guys think?
I'm kind of in the middle. I think part of it was placating toward his bosses. Mickey Loomis has said a lot of the same things. It seemed like maybe Kellen was trying to be on the same page with his general manager, never a bad thing. But we've seen in the NFL recalibrating, as Dan Quinn called it, with the Commanders. They were supposed to be bad, and they surprised the heck out of everyone. But I even look at within the division and look at what Tampa did a few years ago with their salary cap. They were supposed to have a reset year, and they still won the division. So maybe they're shooting for something like that, where you can take steps to getting back to a better salary cap situation while still competing. Maybe they get rid of Derek Carr and bring in, say, I don't know, Justin Fields, and they try and win the division that way. I don't it seemed like he was trying to play it a little bit down the middle.
It's been done though, is what
Yeah,
to your
it's
point.
been
Like, the Eagles ate like a huge salary cap hit moving on from Carson Wentz, and then they kind of caught lightning in a bottle with Jalen Hurts, his second round pick, and their rebuild went like that.
Yep.
The Tampa Bay Buccaneers ate a huge salary cap hit when Tom Brady retired, and they had a bunch of other cap stuff to get to manage. They signed Baker Mayfield to like a $3 million deal, won the division. Obviously, the Commanders drafted Jaden Daniels. That
Right.
changes the whole trajectory of a franchise. The Saints may not have that opportunity this year, but they did it really quickly. The Denver Broncos this past year, they had a huge cap hit for Russell Wilson. They drafted Bo Nix in the first round, and they made the playoffs. Like it's definitely possible. And the Commanders, the Bucks, the Broncos, the Eagles probably not. But all those teams going into those years, everybody thought they were going to be bad. I remember thinking the Bucks might finish fourth in the NFC South a year with Baker Mayfield as the starting quarterback because he was competing with Kyle Trask in training camp. So it's possible, although it just looks extremely unlikely at this stage.
I thought what Mickey said was somewhat enlightening, where he says, look, I know he's placating the masses by saying, hey, it's not hard to get really excited after you talk to him for a while. Maybe I'm reading too much into this, but I think he went in there with a plan when he met with Loomis and the rest of the front office of how he would fix this thing. And I think that's why I kept saying, does he have something up his sleeve? Did he mention like, hey, I think we can go get Matthew Stafford or something, somebody, because you have to have the quarterback. Every one of these guys you mentioned, every one of them, Jaden Daniels, CJ Stroud, the Sean Payton had Drew Brees. You almost have to have that answer. And I don't know if he thinks, just from the reports we're hearing, that Carr's that answer. I don't know if they think it's Spencer Rattler. I feel like there's something that he knows that's given him confidence to think they can do it. Because let's face it, the division is, you could compete in there. I mean, does anybody look at the Bucs and say, boy, they're untouchable? I don't think so. But they've got to have a plan, and it sounds like he's got something in the works. I may be wrong about that, but it sounded that way to me in the way Loomis responded.
I do think it was notable that he didn't really talk about patience, though. Like, this is going to take a long time to commit. Like, sometimes you do hear with coaches, even though they say they're going to, like, stress your winning, that it's a process. Like, you can use the word process as it's a multi-year thing. You mentioned process, but
a lot.
Yeah.
He said a lot.
You can tell he spent time in Philly. But not
not multi-year.
Yeah, not multi-year. He didn't say like, please have patience as we fix this. Like, he kind of set the tone, I think.
All right. I agree with that. There's a lot of process talk, a lot of once we build it talk, but that didn't sound. He's like, no, we're building it now. Right. So it didn't really sound like it was going to be this drawn out process. All right, real quick, guys, we got a couple minutes here before we can wrap up. So, your final thoughts after listening to Kellen Moore and hearing his plan for the direction of the franchise. Start with you, Rod.
For me, I think I kind of mentioned some stuff earlier, but I do think that the Saints got a guy who. I was at the Pelicans game last night. The fan base was fired up, which I thought was. I know you don't make a hire based on that, but I thought that was important. I think they have a guy in here that the fans are going to be excited about this upcoming season, and that's kind of where they need to be right now. And we'll see how it plays out. None of us know how good he's going to be. He may be the best coach to ever, walk in that office, or he may be the worst. We don't know, or he may just be a really solid coach or a really good coach like Sean Payton has his team back relevant again. So. A lot of unknowns, but I think it's definitely something that fans should be optimistic about right now.
Matt?
Kellen Moore's last answer was really revealing, I think, of...
The one you asked, you teed him up. Let's go.
It's really a question.
I asked him about the Sean Payton comparisons, which he's gotten even well before he was coaching here. And he said, maybe Mickey has a type. And
that was a good answer.
Maybe Mickey does have a type, but maybe they're trying to find the next Sean Payton again. And I think that's kind of what they're banking on, and I'll be interested to see if he can do it.
Yeah, and he's different personality, clearly.
Yes, much different.
Totally different, but he's got a lot of the same traits, I think. And I agree. I think Rod hit the nail on the head with his column the other day. Like, he's a breath of fresh air. He's not from the Payton tree. He's something new. completely different background in a lot of ways, but the traits, the foundational traits that work and win in this league, he has. And look, he brought up his father a lot. I mentioned that in my column. Like, I think that was a big influence on him. He clearly grew up around football. So even though he's 36, he's an advanced 36. It's kind of like Arch Manning. You know, he's programmed to be a quarterback in the Manning family. This guy's been programmed to be a coach. So I think in a lot of ways he's old school in a lot of ways, but he's got the new school approach. And I think that's a pretty exciting combination. So I think Saints fans should be excited about this, and I think they are. But the proof's going to be in the pudding. You know, got to win, and it could take a little while, I think. But I think fans are patient right now. I think they're willing to accept a transition year if they can see light at the end of the tunnel, because there hasn't been much the last few years.
All right, well said. Guys, you can read all of our coverage on Kellen Moore's opening press conference over at NOLA.com. We appreciate your support. If you like our podcast, give us a 5-star rating, give us a like, comment, tell us how great we are, or, the other end of things. We appreciate you guys listening. Please follow along our coverage over at NOLA.com. I'm Luke Johnson. I've been joined today by Rod Walker, Matthew Paris, and Jeff Duncan. We are the Saints Insider, and we will catch you all next week.